In today's video, we're going to go over to the Big Ten and rank all 14 starting quarterbacks. Let's get started. At number 14, we have Ryan Hilinski. While I am a big supporter of Ryan, right now there really is no reason to rank him that high. As a recruit coming out of high school, he had more than 25 Division I scholarships, and schools like Ohio State, Georgia, and LSU had even offered the guy. Unfortunately, you may recognize the last name Hilinski, as his brother Tyler actually ended up committing suicide at Washington State, and it was a horribly tragic story. Ryan would have to decide if he still wanted to play football, and he ended up playing in his brother's honor. He was a top 100 4-star recruit and ended up choosing South Carolina. He was not expected to play as a true freshman, but when Jake Bentley went down with a foot injury, Hilinski was forced into action. He threw for 2,357 yards and 11 touchdowns with 5 picks. The Gamecocks went 4-7, and he did lead South Carolina to an upset win over Georgia on the road. They got a new offensive coordinator in Mike Bobo, and he brought in his quarterback from Colorado State, Colin Hill, to be the starter, and after that, Luke Doty got time. Hilinski decided to transfer, and he would choose the Northwestern Wildcats. The year prior, Peyton Ramsey was a transfer quarterback from Indiana, so if things go to plan, Hilinski should be another good starting quarterback from the transfer portal. While I do really like Hilinski, he will have to beat out Hunter Johnson, who was a former 5-star recruit coming out of high school and a Clemson transfer as well. I really do like Hilinski's talents, and I think he will be a good player in time, but the fact that he lost the job to Hill and Doty last year really does say a lot to me, and as of right now, I can't really see him being ranked higher than 14th on this list, but he definitely has a chance to move up, and I really like Hilinski, and I hope he becomes a great player. At number 13, we have Jack Plummer from Purdue. He is not the son of the legendary Arizona Cardinals quarterback, but he did grow up in the state of Arizona. He became a pretty good high school quarterback and would get some Power 5 offers. He would eventually become the first quarterback recruit of the Jeff Brom era in West Lafayette, and he would commit to the Boilermakers. He was a consensus 3-star recruit, but also seen as a guy who could potentially pan out down the road. He would not play his first couple years at Purdue, but in 2019, he would get a chance to actually play. Starting quarterback Elijah Sindelar would go down for the season, so Jack Plummer was thrusted into action, and he would start his first game against TCU. He didn't look overly spectacular in 2019, but he did show some promise. He'd end up getting injured against Nebraska, where he was replaced by Aiden O'Connell for the season, but going into 2020, he'd have a chance to earn it back. Unfortunately for his sake, O'Connell would win the starting job, but he would get injured, and now Plummer had his time to shine. Last year against Minnesota, he would put on a show as he threw for 367 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it should have been 4 touchdowns, but there was an absolutely terrible offensive pass interference call that cost him a touchdown and the Boilermakers the game. From there, he threw for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns against Rutgers, and 334 yards and 3 touchdowns against Nebraska. He finished the 2020 season with 938 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 2 picks, with 1 more touchdown on the ground. He had 3 touchdowns in every game he played in 2020, and honestly looked like a pretty good quarterback towards the end of the year. He will have to fight off Aiden O'Connell, but Plummer has the tools to climb up higher on this list, but because he hasn't done a whole lot so far, it's hard to rank him any higher than 13th, and he's a lot like Hilinski. At number 12, we have Brandon Peters from Illinois. A lot of lists that I've seen have him ranked 14th, but he has 2 years of starting experience, so it's hard to rank Peters that low. Coming out of the state of Indiana, Peters was a big-time recruit. As someone who's from Indianapolis myself, I remember hearing Peters' name a lot, and he was wanted by a lot of schools. He ended up committing to Michigan over the likes of Nebraska, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Iowa, LSU, Virginia Tech, and Wisconsin. He would get his first action during the 2017 season, and he didn't exactly look amazing, but he wasn't awful. He ended up throwing for 672 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 2 picks, but both of those picks would come in their loss to South Carolina in the bowl game. In 2018, he did not see the field at all, as obviously Shea Patterson came in, so he decided to look elsewhere and enter the transfer portal. He ended up settling on Illinois with Lovie Smith, and he immediately became the starter. In his first season as the starting quarterback for the Fighting Illini, he threw for 1,884 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. He also had 3 touchdowns on the ground. Those numbers aren't exactly going to make you a first-round NFL draft pick by any means, but it was pretty good. He actually led Illinois to a bowl game, which was a shocker, and he helped them upset Wisconsin and had that miracle comeback against Michigan State on the road. Expectations were pretty high from going into the 2020 season, but things would get all messed up pretty quickly. He looked terrible in their first game against Wisconsin, and besides 205 yards and a score against Nebraska, he really had a disappointing 2020 campaign. He finished with only 429 yards and 3 touchdowns, but to be fair, he really only played in 3 games. Going into 2021, Bret Bielema is now the coach. This will be his last year, so he will not get to reap the benefits of better recruiting, but Bielema is more of a ground attack style coach, and he hasn't exactly been known for developing quarterbacks. I really do like Petras, and I think he has the talent to be a good quarterback, but I just don't think Illinois was the school for him, and I wish Michigan gave him more of a shot. By the end of the year, he could honestly be at number 14, or he could get beat up by incoming Rutgers transfer Art Sikowski, but as of right now, I have him at number 12. At number 11, we have a guy who I am super high on and I think will be really good in his time, but as of right now, I can't rank him any higher because he's barely done anything. His name is Cade McNamara, and he will likely be the starting quarterback for Michigan this fall. McNamara was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, and he was a star high school football player in the state of Nevada. He was so good that he actually originally committed to Notre Dame, but he would later back out of that pledge and would flip his commitment to the Michigan Wolverines under head coach Jim Harbaugh. For some reason, he seemed like the forgotten quarterback in the Michigan room, as Joe Milton and Dylan McCaffrey were getting a lot of attention, and everyone was just looking to J.J. McCarthy after that. McNamara would get a chance to shine though. After Joe Milton played terrible, McNamara got a chance to play against number 13 Wisconsin, where he'd throw his first career touchdown pass. The following week against Rutgers, he'd throw for 4 touchdowns and run for a touchdown on the ground, as they would beat the Scarlet Knights in triple overtime. He'd play his final game of the year against Penn State, where he'd actually get injured. McNamara actually seemed like he wanted to be there, and he showed that he actually had the poise and potential to be a good quarterback for the Wolverines. He's a polished passer, has great size, and I think he has the mentality to be a good quarterback. Everyone just assumed that either Alan Bowman or J.J. McCarthy would take his spot in 2021, but as of right now, according to everything that I've been reading, McNamara is likely going to be the starter in 2021, has become a leader on the team right now, and people are really excited for him. I even saw one Ohio State website ask the question, is Cade McNamara the Michigan quarterback that Ohio State fans should fear? I can't really answer that question right now, but I'm looking forward to what McNamara can do. At number 10, we have a journeyman quarterback by the name of Noah Vedral. Vedral was only a 3-star recruit and really was not expected to be a game-changing player in the college football world. He'd eventually take his talents to UCF, but he was the backup quarterback there and would choose to transfer. He ended up settling on Nebraska, where he would get a chance to play. He started 2 games for the Nebraska Cornhuskers in 2019 and would have a total of 3 touchdowns on the year, all 3 of which would come on the ground. He passed for 418 yards before he would decide to graduate transfer. He chose Greg Schiano at Rutgers, and he was named the starting quarterback going into the 2020 season. While he wasn't amazing, Vedral was a solid starter and helped make the Rutgers program look at least a little bit respectable. He passed for 1,253 yards, accounted for a total of 10 touchdowns, but did have 8 picks. While Rutgers lost 5 games, he pretty much made them competitive in every single game they played and was a solid player. Some may think it's a crime to rank him this high, but I guarantee you in Greg Schiano's system that Vedral will have a solid season and he will play better than a couple of quarterbacks. He also has more experience and numbers than some of the guys I have ranked below him, and while my expectations aren't out of this world for Vedral, I do think he will be a solid player in Schiano's system until Gavin Wimsatt arrives in 2022. At number 9, we have a quarterback that some people are high on, but I'm just not sold on, and that's Tanner Morgan from Minnesota. Morgan was a consensus 3-star recruit coming out of high school, and he hailed from the state of Kentucky. He had become PJ Fleck's first big quarterback commitment. He was actually originally committed to Western Michigan, but when Fleck left for Minnesota, he obviously came with him. After redshirting in 2017, he was put into a quarterback battle with true freshman walk-on Zach Annexstad. Annexstad would be the starter and would play pretty well, but he would get injured, and from there Morgan would take over and help lead the Gophers to a bowl game. He passed for 1,401 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 6 picks. Annexstad would hurt his foot before the season again, so the starting job was still Morgan's. Not only did he have a great year, but Minnesota also had a spectacular season as well, as he set 11 school records, including passing yards in a season, touchdown passes in a season, and completion percentage. He had the best completion percentage in a single game in Big Ten history, as he went 21 of 22 against Purdue. There was a lot of hype for him going into the 2020 season, but he pretty much disappointed. He only passed for 1,374 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 5 picks. He just didn't look that good, and those are pretty bad numbers for playing in 7 games. While I will say he had a good 2019 campaign, I'm just not ultra high on Tanner Morgan, and after a disaster of a season for him last year, I didn't feel the need to rank him any higher than 9th. Sorry, Minnesota fans. At number 8, we have one of the most controversial quarterbacks in college football in Adrian Martinez. Coming out of high school, Martinez was a big-time quarterback recruit and originally would take his talents to Tennessee. After Pruitt came in, his offer was pulled, and Martinez became the first big quarterback commit of the Scott Frost Nebraska era. Martinez would start right away and showed flash of brilliance for the Huskers as a true freshman. In 2018, he threw for 2,617 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 8 picks, while also rushing for 629 yards and 8 scores, and some called him a legitimate Heisman contender going into the 2019 season. Unfortunately, his numbers would take a massive hit, and Nebraska football was the bust team of 2019. He'd only throw for 1,956 yards, and his touchdowns went down to 10, and he threw 9 interceptions. He still had over 600 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground, but at times during the 2019 season, other quarterbacks got a shot. In a shortened 2020 season, Martinez looked okay, as he threw for 1,055 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 picks, which definitely is not great, but he did have 7 touchdowns on the ground. In terms of his outlook for the 2021 season, I do finally expect Nebraska to be somewhat respectable, and I do believe they will get to a bowl game this upcoming season. Martinez now has 3 years of starting experience under his belt, and I see no reason why he can't be an above-average starting quarterback in the Big Ten. He has the potential to be one of the best in the conference, but we'll see if he can put it all together, and I'm excited to watch how Martinez develops and plays during the 2021 season. At number 7, we have a guy that I'm really high on that others aren't really talking about, and that is Anthony Russo from Michigan State. Russo was a big-time player coming out of the state of Pennsylvania, and football ran in his blood as his uncle actually played at NC State. He ended up committing to the Temple Owls, who at the time were under head coach Matt Rule. For his first few years in Temple, he was a backup and a guy who sat on the bench. Eventually, he would become the starter, and he'd go down as one of the best Owl quarterbacks to ever play. He went 16-10 as a starter, and is 3rd in all-time passing yards with 6,292, 3rd in passing touchdowns with 44, 3rd in passing completions with 536, and 4th in passing attempts. He could have had even more as he started the first 3 games of the 2020 season, but would miss the rest of the year due to a shoulder injury. He had 1 year of eligibility left and decided to enter the portal, and would choose Mel Tucker's Michigan State Spartans. He said he wanted to progress better both on and off the field as a quarterback, and he will have that opportunity at Michigan State. Michigan State has a pro-style offense, and I do expect Russo to win the starting job, as according to my research, he is light years ahead in terms of learning the playbook, and he obviously has a lot of experience and stats to his name. He will face competition from Peyton Thorne, but in my opinion, there's no reason why Russo will not be the starter this upcoming fall. At number 6, we have Iowa's Spencer Petras. Coming out of the state of California, Petras was one of the better quarterbacks in the country, as he had a spectacular high school career. He was known for being a deadhead and would eventually take his talents to Oregon State. After Gary Anderson would end up leaving the program, Petras would have to find a new school, and he would commit to the Iowa Hawkeyes. He spent time as a backup to Nate Stanley, but everyone knew that Petras was the future of the team. He would end up starting in 2020 and did play pretty well. It was a bit of a rocky start, as the Hawkeyes would lose their first 2 games, but then Petras would play better, and Iowa as a whole got pretty good. He led them to 6 straight wins and would pass for 1,569 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 5 picks, with 2 more touchdowns on the ground. He would have gotten a chance to showcase his talent in a bowl game in the Music City Bowl, but Missouri could not play due to not having enough players. Petras may not wow you, but he is a good, solid quarterback. According to all the research I've done, he is the clear-cut starter going into 2021, and he showed he could get a lot better last year, and I expect him to take the next step in 2021 and become one of the Big Ten's best gunslingers. At number 4, we have a last name and a name that everyone will recognize, as we have Maryland's Taulia Tagovailoa. We all know his brother Tua became a 5-star recruit out of the Aloha State, but when Tua went to Alabama, so did his family. In the Alabama high school football system, Taulia became one of the best quarterback prospects in the country, and just like his brother, would eventually commit to the Crimson Tide. At one point, he was expected to be the future of the program, but after Mac Jones and Bryce Young solidified themselves as the 2 main guys, Taulia put his name in the transfer portal and looked to his former offensive coordinator Mike Locksley. Locksley had recently taken the Maryland head coaching job, and they would need a new quarterback after Josh Jackson was done. Taulia immediately made an impact on the Maryland program and beat out quarterback Lance Legendre for the starting job. Last year, Taulia would play in 4 games, as in his first start against Northwestern, he did look awful, as he only threw for 94 yards and 3 picks, but the following week against Minnesota, he showed the kind of talent he had. He threw for 394 yards and 3 touchdowns, while also rushing for nearly 60 yards and 2 scores on the ground in an overtime win over the Golden Gophers. The following week, he'd lead them on the road against Penn State, and he'd throw for nearly 300 yards and 3 scores as they would beat the Nittany Lions by 2 scores. He'd play in his final game of the year against Indiana and would finish the season with 1,011 yards and a combined 9 touchdowns. While at times he didn't look spectacular, Taulia has a lot of talent and showed flash of what he could become. Maryland has a ton of weapons with guys like Raheem Jarrett and Jashawn Jones, and in year 3 under Loxley, I expect Taulia to lead a potent Maryland offense, and I'm really excited to see what he can do. At number 4, we have Penn State quarterback Sean Clifford. While some say he has been a disappointment, I think Clifford will have a really good 2021 season. He came from a powerhouse high school in Ohio as he went to St. Xavier. While he was there, he would blossom into a 4-star recruit and would eventually commit to the Penn State Nittany Lions over the likes of Michigan State, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Louisville. His rating would increase throughout the recruiting process, and he would have a chance to be an impact player for Penn State down the line. In 2018, he'd appear in 4 games as a backup and pass for 195 yards and 2 scores. In 2019, he was now the starter, and at times he looked like a bright young star. He had 4 touchdowns against Buffalo and 3 touchdowns against Michigan, Purdue, and Maryland, and had led the Penn State Nittany Lions to an 8-0 record. After that, they were matched up against rival Minnesota, and in a battle of the undefeateds, Clifford would throw 3 picks, and their undefeated season was done. This sucked for Clifford because in 2 of his bigger games against Ohio State and Minnesota, he ended up having his worst 2 performances of the season, so his national reputation wasn't spectacular. He still had a great redshirt freshman campaign, as he threw for 2,521 yards, 22 touchdowns, and only 6 picks, with 5 more rushing touchdowns on the ground, as he threw for 2,654 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, with 5 rushing touchdowns on the ground. He was expected to have a big 2020 campaign, but things would start out tough, as despite 300 yards and 4 touchdowns combined, they lost on the road in a controversial game to Indiana. He would throw for 300 yards and 3 scores, but they would lose to Ohio State. The season started to fall apart as they lost to Maryland, and Clifford came out and said that the locker room was not together and the team wasn't united. He put up decent stats the rest of the year and would finish the 2020 campaign with nearly 2,000 yards passing, 16 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, with 3 more rushing touchdowns on the ground. Definitely not bad numbers by any means, but the narrative around Penn State football last year was pretty bad, and I think Sean Clifford is one of the more underrated and overly attacked players in college football. As before I started today's video, I thought Clifford wasn't that good, but he really hasn't been that bad so far for Penn State, and if he can just show up in a big game and Penn State can get back to normal, Clifford will be one of the top quarterbacks in the country when it's all said and done. At number 3, we have Wisconsin quarterback Graham Mertz. Coming out of the Kansas City area, Mertz was originally not a big-time quarterback prospect. His only Power 5 offer for a while was Wisconsin, and he would take that job gladly. After going to a ton of camps and competitions, Mertz would blow up into a 4-star recruit, and even got an offer from Alabama. Going into his freshman year at Wisconsin, Mertz was the backup to Jack Cohen, but everyone knew he was the future of the Badgers program. Jack Cohen would get hurt going into the 2020 season, so Mertz was the starter, and he definitely impressed. Impressive was an understatement, as in his first game against Illinois, he completed 20 of 21 passes for 248 yards and 5 touchdowns and had a nearly perfect game. After that, they were hit with a ton of positive tests, and the Wisconsin season got all messed up. He finished the season with 1,238 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, with 2 more rushing touchdowns on the ground, but things really got all messed up for Mertz in the Wisconsin program, and I expect him to be back and better than ever in 2021. At number 2, we have a guy who hasn't done anything so far, but by the end of the 2021 season, he will potentially be at the top of the Big Ten. His name is CJ Stroud, and he's likely going to be the starting quarterback for the Buckeyes this fall. Stroud had a very inspiring story growing up, and he overcame a ton of tough circumstances to become one of the top high school quarterbacks in the country, and committed to the Buckeyes over the likes of Georgia and Michigan. In his senior season, he threw for 4,000 yards and 47 touchdown passes, and he led his school to a 9-4 record. Last year for the Buckeyes, he appeared in 1 game against Michigan State, where on his only play, he took a 48-yard rush to the house for a score. Going into 2021, there is a quarterback battle between him, Jack Miller, and 5-star Kyle McCord. Right now, it does look like it's Stroud's quarterback battle to lose, and he will more than likely be the guy in 2021. He's seen as a player with a ton of potential, and someone who could be a first-round pick down the road, but he's going to have to hold off Quinn Ewers in 2022, and really impress in 2021 if he wants to keep his starting job for the future. While Stroud has only had 1 play so far in his college career and hasn't done a whole lot, I know Ohio State fans will be very upset if they don't see their guy in the top 3, and I do believe in his potential, so that is why Stroud is at number 2 right now. Finally, at number 1, we have Penix Jr. from Indiana. This may be a controversial take because Ohio State fans will think their quarterback is automatically the best dude in the conference, but Penix has showed that he is arguably the best quarterback in the Big Ten through some of his past performances. Coming out of Florida, Penix was a big name on the recruiting trail and originally chose to take his talents to Tennessee. When he came in though, Jeremy Pruitt pulled both his offer and Adrian Martinez's offer, and Penix would have to find a new school. He eventually took a liking to Indiana and head coach Tom Allen and committed to the Hoosiers. He was a high 3-star recruit and would get his first chance to play against Penn State in 2018, but unfortunately, he'd go down with a season-ending injury right when his career was starting. He became the starter going into the 2019 season and really did impress in his first few games. Against Michigan State, he had a nearly perfect performance, but it wasn't enough for them to win the game on the road. Unfortunately, he would get injured, and backup quarterback Peyton Ramsey would take over the starting job and lead the Hoosiers to one of their best seasons in program history. He didn't get a chance to get his revenge against Tennessee in their bowl game, but Indiana had pretty high expectations going into the 2020 season. Against Penn State, he would struggle to a degree, but he did have 2 touchdowns and had an extremely athletic 2-point conversion to help them upset the number 8 ranked Nittany Lions. Against Rutgers, he threw for nearly 300 yards and a combined 4 touchdowns, and in their game against Michigan, he'd have nearly 350 yards and 3 scores as well. Against Michigan State, he'd have his worst game of the year, as he would throw 2 picks, but still had 2 touchdowns in the process. Against Ohio State, he had a nearly perfect game as he threw for almost 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 pick, and the Hoosiers only lost to the Buckeyes by 7 on the road. The sky was the limit for Indiana football, but against Maryland, injuries would haunt him once again, as after a QB scramble against Maryland, he'd end up hurting his leg, and he was out for the rest of the 2020 campaign. From there, Jack Tuttle would take over, but Penix finished the 2020 season with 1,645 yards, 14 touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 4 picks, and this all happened in only 5.5 games. Penix has one of the best arms in the country, is a true dual-threat quarterback, and has that it factor that all scouts are looking for. Some big boards have him as a potential first-round pick in 2022, and many believe he could go down as the best quarterback in Indiana football history, but he will have to stay healthy, as in his past 3 years, he has never been able to complete a full season. Other than that, Indiana football is on the rise, and they have a ton of talented weapons for him to throw the ball to, and Penix is arguably the best quarterback in the Big Ten, but he just has to stay healthy, and it'll be a race between him, Clifford, Mertz, and Stroud for the title of best quarterback in the Big Ten in 2021. So yeah, in today's video, we ranked all the starting quarterbacks in the Big Ten 1 through 14, and be sure to let me know your thoughts. Who did I rank too high? Who did I rank too low? And is there a quarterback who could potentially beat out one of the guys I had on the list? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section, give me another topic that I could do next, and if you want to support the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video ranking all the starting quarterbacks in the SEC. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.